Thanks for joining us today in the latest of our Casino Beats 100 Club Pathways series. I'm happy to say I'm joined today by John Gordon, who is the CEO and co-founder of Incentive Games. Thanks for joining us today, John.
Thanks for having us, Craig. It's a pleasure.
So we have a kind of standardised thing for these features, as some of you may well know. So we'll begin in the same place we normally do, and we'll take things right back in the journey of John Gordon. How did your career path start? What were your hopes and aspirations of a youngster? Was you always getting into the gambling industry? Did you have any other jobs and career paths that you could have pursued?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so I actually started as a chemical engineer. I went to university when I was like 16 to be a chemical engineer through in Edinburgh. Had to basically just I basically just researched what's the highest paying job in the UK, and it was at the time the chemical engineer was in the top 3. So I studied chemical engineering at Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh, became a relatively successful chemical engineer. I became a lead chemical engineer for BP in Trinidad and Tobago. So I was out there for about 5 years. And whilst I was in the Caribbean working for BP, I used to see the FanDuel adverts and DraftKings adverts for fantasy sports betting. And I was always creating algorithms to beat bookmakers or writing algorithms for football. And I used to write algorithms for fantasy football as well for me and my friends to play against one another. So I would create competitions for people that I knew at BP and such, and we would bet thousands of pounds, and I did okay at that. So we, in conjunction with what I used to play fantasy football for the Barclays Premier League at the time, I thought, well, we could do this, I could do this, and we could do fantasy betting in the UK and Europe, because, you know, the FanDuel and DraftKings were focusing on the US. So I left my job in the Caribbean and came back to the UK, Scotland, and started my original company about 10 years ago, which was Fantasy Football Real Money. So me and 3 of my founders were all engineers and mathematicians from Edinburgh universities, and we founded Fantasy Football Real Money. We had no idea what we were doing, but we paid an external software development company to basically create a fantasy betting product. The first few years, back in 2013 and 14, we were still full-time engineers, math people. And then as we evolved as a company, we launched a product in the UK. We got our a pool betting license. And then we got our sportsbook license and started upselling from fantasy to sportsbook. So back in 2016, we had our own sports betting license, and we would, if for instance, if Harry Kane was in your fantasy team, Harry Kane to score the first goal was 4-1, so we would upsell to our own sportsbook. And we were very good at that, so much so that, you know, our fantasy app was the number 1 app in the UK App Store for a while. But we weren't making any money off of the fantasy betting. And when we got our sportsbook license, we started upselling to sportsbook. And although we were upselling very well, we weren't really an operator. You know, we didn't know about affiliates. We didn't know about looking after your VIPs. We were very much product and app focused, and we then got our own casino license, and we cross-sold to casino. So we were able to acquire a customer on fantasy for like £1 in the UK, depositing customer. We could convert about 25% to sportsbook. So we were acquiring sportsbook customers for about a £5, and then we could cross-selling to casino, you know, costing us about £20 for a casino user. And it was around 2016-17 that Victor Chandler and some other investors advised us that this is the real secret sauce that we had, which was acquiring customers, cross-selling them and upselling them, and creating, rather than just one fantasy game, why don't we create a suite of products that our clients can choose from? So we then rebranded or pivoted from being a B2C to being a B2B company, which is Incentive Games. It took us a little while, and then I think we founded the company Incentive Games about 3 years ago. And we're now the number one in the world by way of entries into our games, the quality of our products and our clients. So our clients include Bet365, Betfair as well, the Flutter Group, FanDuel in the US, Entain, B1, Betway, LiveScore Group, and many others.
So before we move on to look at Incentive Games, let's kind of look at your own path and your own journey a little bit. I mean, you've said about you going back from the Caribbean to Scotland, which we all know are two very similar locations. But when you entered the gambling industry and you said we didn't really know what we was doing, and you repeated that a couple of times then, how would you kind of assess your journey from that point to now?
Yeah, it seemed quite natural. I mean, we weren't, like my grandfather was a bookmaker, and a lot of my family are on the wrong side of the betting terminal. So it was sort of in my natural upbringing that there's a lot of gambling. I'm from Paisley, which is outside of Glasgow, not the most glamorous place. So there was a lot more being a gambler myself. So I understood. I was brought up in a gambling sort of atmosphere and society. And I used to play to a not too bad standard of football in the Caribbean and in the UK. So I was, and betting was part and parcel of that. A lot of my friends were professionals, and they were, betting as professionals, rightly or wrongly. So it was sort of ingrained in me. And then being a chemical engineer, I was able to use my math skills to see how can we adapt. How can we create something that's new and different? Which is why it came really natural to me. So I basically took a single football match and I turned every single action of it into a point scoring system. So every pass, every tackle, every header, every cross was points. So it was like an immersive experience. You choose six. So Man, you were playing Chelsea. You just choose 6 players, and your friends choose 6 players. And you would watch the game on your phone. You would see your fantasy on your phone, and the game would be on the TV, and you would sort of immerse yourself on a second screen experience. So although it looks like I'm talking about Incentive Games again, that was our history. It really was a passion for me of mine to mix maths and engineering with football in the first instance, and trying to write algorithms to beat bookmakers was another thing of mine, where I would work with a professor of statistics and other engineer professors and see if we could write algorithms, and we did it to a degree of success on the side. And I sort of took it from a different approach with regards to, I was looking at a player level, and we could assess the ability of the player and the probability of a team. But we ended up we're predicting the starting lineup, which has its own flaws. So although it do seem as if I'm harping back a lot about the industry, I am the CEO in the last 9 years of this company, and the previous one where it was basically just a pivot. It was the same company really. And it was all this sort of meandering through that got us to where we are today.
And I mean, this may seem like a bit of a simplistic question on the surface, but I mean, it's an ever-changing industry, as we all know. It's constantly changing, things are constantly pivoting. What would you say are the main challenges you've encountered with Incentive Games, and how have you kind of overcame them?
So, just as we were making a relative success, like just before the pandemic hit, and we became more. It was very much an educational piece about 2018-19, where we were saying like, look at the Sky Bet model, look at the free to play games here, whether it be household names would be like the Prize Machine or Super Six. And we were selling games on a B2B basis like that. But years ago, it was very much we had to educate them and show them the business model for it without real data of our own, because we didn't have enough data at the time, and we didn't have any clients apart from our own small sample of data. It was a tough sell. One of our we hired a sales director, Kevin. He's been phenomenal, and he managed to get his companies like Betway, Dafabet. He signed up all these clients for us, and we were just about to go live for the Euros in 2018, and then the pandemic hit, and we all know the rest. So all of our games were cancelled. All our contracts were cancelled, and it was on a fixed monthly fee basis plus bonuses, and there was no sport, therefore there was no games. We could have just rolled over and said, oh well, we tried, but we did the opposite. We created virtual games. So we given our engineering background, I turned the algorithms that I used to use to beat the bookmaker, I turned it into a virtual product. And Kevin then just doubled down and sold to the same clients these different virtual games that didn't need a live sporting event. And I think pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, we probably quadrupled our staff and many times our revenue. But it was very challenging because, we went for a slam shot. There was no help from the government. Me and the other director, Stuart, had to sell personal assets to pay our staff. We put no one on furlough. We put no wage cuts. And we just doubled down on the fact that sport will come back. We're on to something here. But it was really, really tough times. We had no revenue and lots of staff to pay. And there was no end. And we didn't know when it was going to end. So it was really, really challenging. To say the least, and stressful.
And with all that in mind, the troubles you encountered there, I know from previous conversations, one key thing you want to talk about is the your free-to-play casino games, free-play casino games. Did kind of these two things overlap for you? Is that when you kind of thought, right, we need to kind of jump into this, and this needs to become a key component for us right now, because you never know with the uncertainty of life?
Yeah, so we diversed into virtual sports. We were predominantly had a background in real sports, soccer, and we've got all sorts of sports now. Then we created virtual products, which were great. And then we created jackpot products based on real sporting events. And more laterally, we were asked, so many times, can you do casino products? And we're basically using the same. We approach things from a psychological basis, science of gamification. We use the same data and the same learnings we've done for sport and adapt it to the different verticals. So it was quite simple for us to create a daily free casino game. We avoid just a spin the wheel, and there's no those work, by the way, but we would. And it's certainly not. The products are fine and great and they work, but for us we do more deeper, more progressive daily free games and use different psychological motivators to come back. Because what we're seeing now is retention is the key, and that's if our clients' products are good enough, we will get them back to the site and they will stay. And those daily free retention games are such a powerful tool in the industry. I would argue to say one of, if not the most important tool in the industry at the moment.
And if we look back on your history within the industry, what would you say on a broad scale is kind of the biggest things influencing the industry, whether that's for the better or for the worse? whether it be in the past or whether it be in the present? What are the biggest challenges facing the industry?
It is retention. I mean, people are looking at companies are very acquisition focused, and we're often asked so many times acquisition, and we do acquisition, right? We can do like a big jackpot game and we can acquire customers. But unless the client's product is unless the client product is good enough, they will not stick. They will come and they will churn. So it doesn't matter what the acquisition cost norm is for that country, you cannot get part of that unless your product is good enough and the retention. So it's really about, for me, is the focusing on retention. And focusing on those companies that are saying they're entertainment companies, or probably a political or shareholder or compliance point of view. But really, this is entertainment. And when we do pay to play products and we have a margin on there, you cannot imagine how many CEOs want to increase the margin. And I would say, no, reduce the margin. Keep them on there for longer. Let them enjoy the products and your suite and give them something original that is not going to kill their budget in a day, because that would have a bad experience in their head, not to mention, the harm it could have to that individual. Reduce the margin as small as possible such that it's sustainable and cost effective for you to run, and that will keep the users coming back and enjoying it and experiencing things within the limits. I think the industry is getting better, but we're in a luxury position not to be able to, we're in a luxury position now to choose who we work with. So we don't need to work with people that are companies that think that they just want to increase the margin. But those are the two things. It's like, typically we're a partner or service provider where they say, incentive games get, acquisition, or increase the margin, and we would loathe to just, do the same. We're trying to explain to them that let's look at it from a holistic point of view. Let's try to give them original content, keep them on there for longer, and reduce the margin. It's too short-sighted the other way, and 99% of the time those companies that I'm talking about do not succeed in the long run.
And we began, as we normally begin these features, so we'll end in the usual way as well, and that is by asking, if there was one question you could put to the industry, what would that one question be?
One question to the industry. It would be, I don't know, how tall do you think I am?
A great question. Maybe we'll get a panel on that at our next event. How tall is John Gordon? Thanks a lot for your time today, John. Yeah. It's been a good interview. I've enjoyed that one.
Me too. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time, Craig. It was a real honour.